Hey there, it's Lucas Catton. And I had been taking a look at something recently that struck me as somewhat of a paradox. And yet, as I looked deeper, I found out that there's actually a lot of merit to it. And that's the notion of toxic positivity. And it's something that I have I've absolutely been guilty of in the past and certainly even very recently. And I guess for a little bit more on that, this comes from the psychologygroup.com. And the definition of toxic positivity is the overgeneralization of a happy, optimistic state that results in the denial, minimization, and invalidation of the authentic human emotional experience. And that's definitely something that I have been guilty of, and in an attempt to try and remain optimistic, that has gone overboard to a denial of difficulty or sometimes a lack of validation or a lack of acknowledgement of other people's struggle and strife and how that can affect them. And it had been brought to my attention before, and I kind of dismissed it, honestly, because I took even that as being overly negative or something, or critical of positive thinking. And as I got further into this and read some more information and took a look at it, I definitely realized that there are times when I have done just that. I have been presented either with my own or someone else's difficult situation or something that they have been having to deal with or go through, and unintentionally or inadvertently dismissed the difficulty and say, some examples are, somebody goes, "Oh, I'm really bummed that I failed a test." And you go, "Oh, big deal. You'll have plenty of tests. You'll be fine in the future." Or "Don't worry about it. Everything's okay." When to them, it's actually, certainly a bigger deal, or there was more meaning to it behind it. And sometimes it can be a fine line. I use that as a very light example. There's much more difficult situations that many of us are experiencing right now from all the different things that we're having to deal with in life. And as difficult as 2020 has been, and as many memes have been out there about the difficulty of 2020, the fact remains is that it is still a very difficult time for a lot of people. And a lot of us are processing different things in very different ways and having to go through a lot of changes and a lot of struggle and a lot of strife. And that is very real. And I am sorry, and this is a public apology to anybody who I have failed to acknowledge those difficulties, because it is not intentional. And this really opened my eyes quite a bit to that there we have to make room for things to be, and that we can't cover up difficulty. We can't ignore strife. We can't ignore these challenges. And that's not what I was attempting to do, although at times that is what was happening. And it really made me look at, so how can we do both? How can we be positive, be optimistic, and still acknowledge things? And one of those things came back to me through studying ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and how one of the first steps is to make room for a challenging situation or difficult feeling or an experience or struggle or suffering that we're experiencing. And that by first pausing and making room for it, allowing it to be, that there is an acknowledgement there. And when dealing with, let's say, interpersonal relations with someone else or loved one or a friend, a coworker, sometimes just a random person even on the street that you may come in contact with, how do we make room for their suffering, for their difficulty, for their struggles that are very real to them, and display a sense of empathy and acknowledge what they're going through, and yet still be able to show positive and optimistic responses beyond that. And I think that's a lot of where it goes, is it's a recognition and an acknowledgement of that, and a making room for that, and having space or holding space for, yes, this is a difficult time, or yes, this is a difficult situation, or I'm so terribly sorry for what you're going through. And yet, finding out what we can do to be of assistance. Sometimes it's just listening. Sometimes it is offering solutions. Often it's not offering solutions. And that's where I had failed as well. I would immediately jump into wanting to fix something. And sometimes it doesn't need fixing. It just needs to be for a little bit. Just need to allow for it to exist and not deny it. Different from positive psychology. And there's a good definition on positivepsychology.com here. And let's see, positive psychology is a field of psychology that focuses on, spends much time in this thinking about topics like character strengths, optimism, life satisfaction, happiness, well-being, gratitude, compassion, self-compassion, as well as self-esteem and self-confidence, hope, and elevation. You know, they focus on these positive experiences like happiness, joy, inspiration, and love, and positive traits like gratitude, resilience, compassion, and positive institutions like applying positive principles within entire organizations and institutions. And that is really, when I think of positivity and when I think of optimism, this is where I naturally go and where I tend to go, okay, let's focus on solutions. Let's focus on the positive aspects. Let's focus on lots of different things that are going to benefit. Let's focus on these character strengths, not the defects. And I'm as guilty as anybody as not doing this or picking apart different situations and being positive about most things, but one or two things being negative about, or one or two traits about someone and being negative about those, or overly focusing attention on those. It's part of being human, and it's difficult to overcome sometimes. But when looking at these as a whole, when comparing positive psychology and wanting to focus on positivity, gratitude, happiness, strengths, solutions, satisfaction, like those types of things as a general way of being is a positive thing. Being careful not to cross over into what can sometimes be a fine line into toxic positivity. The overgeneralization of a happy, optimistic state that results in a denial. That's the key. Results in a denial or minimization or invalidation of an authentic human emotional experience. And that's something that I'm going to continue trying to work on. And I think it's something that if we take a look at, we can try and be more aware of as a whole. You can be positive about something and still acknowledge the difficulty. You can be optimistic about a future outcome and still understand that there's struggle in between. And I think that in current political realm, including many social difficulties, including healthcare crises, and all kinds of things that we are experiencing as a nation and as a world, but also on a much more minute individual level of things that we're experiencing in relationships and within ourselves, and to be able to make room and acknowledge those things as well. So that is my message for today, to be aware of toxic positivity and also to understand the benefits of positive psychology, and that they are two different things, and the absence of denial, the making room for, the acknowledgement of the difficulties and the strife is a key thing in between. I'd love to hear if you have examples of that, of times that you've seen. If you happen to know me personally and want to call me out on times where I've failed to acknowledge things, that's okay too. I need that. I think we all need checks and balances in our lives, and to be able to be open to criticism of things that we may or may not have done, and be able to examine that, because that self-inquiry is part of our growth. We have to be able to examine those things within ourselves of where we need to improve and change and better, and not get down on that, but acknowledge it and move forward. If you'd like, hit me up anytime, lucascatton.com. Feel free to comment on this or send me a note, and I'd love to connect up with you. Until then, I hope you're healthy, I hope you're happy, and be well.